Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Sniper Ghost Warrior 2 for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This is a first-person shooter and the sequel to Sniper Ghost Warrior. It was developed by City Interactive and released in March of 2013. And it was kind of interesting because this did receive considerably better reviews than the first game, although they still weren't particularly flattering. Of course, anything better than the original game is a good thing, because the original game was pretty terrible, and if you've seen my review of that, you know why. It had horrendous AI, it had tons of technical problems, the level design was just crap, it was every modern military FPS problem amplified to ridiculous levels. It was just a complete mess of a game, and it's right that it didn't get well received. But it was a cool concept, and it was something that I hoped that they could fix with the sequel. So the question here becomes, did they learn from their mistakes with Sniper Ghost Warrior 2? Did they make this a better game? And did they capitalize on the sniper experience, where it's something that's very unique in terms of first-person shooters, and so it was a real shame to see it executed so incredibly poorly in the original game. But did they pull it off here, or did something else happen entirely? Well, obviously the graphics are more modernized than what you saw in the original games, but they went to a considerably higher level with this one. They went with the CryEngine, specifically CryEngine 3. So it had a lot of advanced effects available, which I actually don't have enabled here because it pretty much tanks your frame rate without any real noticeable change in the visuals. So oddly enough, the thing runs at pretty much 60 frames per second or higher, even on a system that's as outdated as mine, and I haven't had any real issues with it, except when I turn on the DX11 effects, which, again, don't seem to do anything, so what's the point of having them? That said, again, the game looks so much better than the original game, but that's not saying much. The original game looked terrible. Had tons of plasticky looking people, there were tons of graphical glitches all over the place, and I'm happy to report that I haven't noticed particularly major graphical glitches in this one. The worst it really got was some occasional pop-in, and that's something I see in a lot of games, and it didn't really bother me as much because it wasn't so blatant as it was in the original game. Here it was more like a bush wouldn't spawn in until I got closer, and then once it was there just fine. So it was just a matter of it didn't load in quick enough, per se. So that does occasionally happen, but other than that, there really haven't been all that many graphical glitches with it. And it, again, looks a lot better than the original as a result. And, of course, the CryEngine 3 certainly helps with that as well. You've got some pretty nice shader effects here and there. I don't actually like the way the water looks. I feel like it actually looked better in the original game, but that's just something that CryEngine did really well for some bizarre reason. The foliage in particular looks quite good, and the environments in general are absolutely packed with detail, even though the texture work is not particularly amazing. Admittedly, it is a cross-platform game, so you kind of expect that, but it would have been nice to see maybe a high-res texture pack on the PC or something like that. But it doesn't look bad by any means. In fact, there's quite a few decent-looking things on there. It's just that when you're looking at first-person stuff in particular, the animations seem kind of clunky. They're not anywhere near as bad as they were in the original game, but there's just oddities here and there. For example, when you reload, the animations are very over-exaggerated and just seem awkward. So, apart from those, they did a pretty good job overall, and apart from some pretty crappy lip-syncing, which admittedly most games do lip-syncing terribly, it really doesn't have any major downsides in terms of its visuals. In fact, there's quite a bit of color in this game for this particular genre, which is a modern military FPS. So, that pretty much blew my mind. It actually has color in it. Wow. I was baffled by this, because the original game was going for that whole brown and gray and realistic look, whereas this one really isn't. It looks actually fairly realistic for the most part, so I applaud them on that. And then there's the sound design, which is pretty solid, actually. The voice acting at times is the cheesy military jargon you come to expect from modern military FPSs. In fact, that's about 98% of the dialogue. And the rest of it is often some melodramatic, cheesy crap that, again, you come to expect from modern military FPSs. Nothing out of the ordinary here. The voice actors do a decent enough job. They certainly don't make it cringe-worthy, let's put it that way. The music is unfortunately par for the course as far as modern military FPSs go. It's just the same old thing that you've heard in every other modern military shooter ever. And then there are the sound effects, which do their job for the most part. They're pretty decent. They work. I'm not a huge fan of the weapons fire in this game. A lot of the suppressor sounds are that very obvious movie-inspired thing with the really high-pitched, squeaky noise, which is not how those sound at all. And so that actually kind of annoyed me. I did notice some sound glitches, actually, particularly with the suppressed pistol. And sometimes it would just not play the sound effect at the right time. It would play it about a second or a second and a half after the action had already completed. So that got kind of annoying. But other than that, I didn't really notice all that many major sound glitches. It did get kind of annoying when I would reach a certain point in the level where it was scripted, and the dialogue that had happened up to that point just abruptly cut out for the cutscene or whatever. So that was kind of annoying, but other than that, there wasn't anything majorly wrong with sound glitches or anything like that, and so that was certainly appreciated. But the sound effects certainly aren't impressive, and I'm surprised at the general lack of atmospheric sound effects. That would have gone so much to making this thing more immersive, but they just kind of crapped out on those. But oh well, they've done a pretty good job for the most part, so I at least have to applaud them for that. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is that you play as Captain Cole Anderson. He is a sniper, and in this particular game he is working with a team to try to stop an arms dealer from dealing bioweapons. That's it. That's your entire plot, really. They try to work in a subplot with what happened long before the events of the game during the genocide in Bosnia. And it has a very, very pathetic impact on the actual plot. Makes it even more predictable than it already is. And you really don't care. There's no emotional attachment to any of the characters in this game, even though they certainly have a bit more personality than the characters did in the original Sniper Ghost Warrior. That said, it's certainly not enough to raise this thing beyond just another modern military shooter in terms of its plot and characters. But then there's the gameplay. This is where things get interesting, because, once again, it has a more in-depth sniping mechanic than most other FPSs. You have to adjust for windage, you have to adjust for the arc of the bullet and things like that. It's not a huge amount of adjustment, it's actually pretty easy to do. They give you a red circle to help you out with that. So it's a lot like Sniper Elite V2's system. But that said, it's certainly appreciated that they went with a more in-depth mechanic with that than most other games on the market. And that's pretty much what sets this thing apart. You're playing as a sniper. Now, in the original Sniper Ghost Warrior, you played as a bunch of different characters throughout the course of the game. In this, you play solely as Captain Anderson, and so you are only sniping throughout the game. And that involves a lot of sneaking around, that involves a lot of relying on your spotter to call out targets for you, adjusting for your shots and things like that, and doing a lot of pinpoint accuracy stuff. Now, they try to movieify it, if that makes sense, by throwing in a lot of just frankly stupid crap, where you can snipe say a grenade that's on an enemy's belt, and it will blow up and take him and anybody around him out. Or you can take out multiple targets with a single shot, and they actually make you do that several times throughout the game. And so it's stuff that's pretty ridiculous if you really think about it, but at the same time, it's still kind of cool that they're trying something different, and that it's going for something that you really don't see all that much in FPSs. It's just nice to have something different for a change. That said, it does wear thin very quickly because this game is incredibly scripted. Every single thing you do in this game is scripted. And while it does work for this game, it does actually add on to the idea of being a sniper, because snipers do rely on their spotters all the time for calling out targets, calling out how they see that target and what adjustments they can make to actually make the shot. Things like that. They didn't really go far enough with it. They didn't really go tactical enough with it. Didn't give you enough freedom. Instead, they railroad you up the wazoo. You constantly are going along this super linear path. You're constantly dealing with just these scripted events that come up and you're like, well, here we go again. Oh, look, there's an enemy in my way. Gee, I wonder what I do. Oh, look, there's a melee takedown. Things like that. Admittedly, all of this is a ton better than the original game. Again, that's not saying much. The AI in this game is not horrendously broken, unlike its predecessor. It's still pretty stupid, but it's not horrendously broken. They still have a hard time spotting you when it should be kind of painfully obvious, although they're better about it in this one. They're more consistent. And you find that you'll get spotted when you don't really know why you got spotted or how you got spotted, and other times you'll be in what you think is plain view, but they won't spot you. It's still confusing as hell when that whole problem runs around, but at the same time, it is a lot more consistent than what you had in the original game, and they do have an indicator for where the enemy is and how close they are to raising the alarm on you. So that is well appreciated. Admittedly, it's kind of annoying to look at that because it's at the bottom left corner of the screen surrounding the radar bit. So that can get pretty annoying having to pay attention to that rather than pay attention to what's going on in the game. But it's well appreciated because, again, it's better than what the original game had, which again isn't saying much. They removed the idea of having anything other than a sniper rifle and a suppressed pistol entirely. The only weapons you get in this game are sniper rifles and that suppressed pistol. So you're not running around running and gunning at all. You're really sneaking around, being careful, slow, methodical with your shots. So they at least got that right. They had finally gotten their sensibilities straight. They still try to make it too much like a modern military shooter though, and it really does come across as ridiculous and ham-fisted as a result. It does lose its steam very quickly though, and you do find that the very short campaign, at being roughly 4 to 5 hours at most really, isn't going to keep you sated all that long, and you find that it feels like just another modern military shooter in so many aspects that it taints the whole. So those few moments you do get where you're like, well, I actually kind of feel like a sniper now, well, it's usually dashed pretty quickly. And then there's the multiplayer, which is almost dead, but I did manage to get into a couple of games. It's an interesting idea. Snipers versus snipers. You still have to maintain your breathing, you still have to adjust for windage, that sort of thing. But now you're playing against other people, and the game doesn't help you out anymore. So it's a pretty interesting idea. The problem is, you can spend entire matches doing almost nothing. And I actually went to record a match, and from start to finish, I didn't get a single kill, nor did I die other than once. So it was incredibly boring to watch. So if you complain about campers in games like Counter-Strike or Call of Duty or Battlefield, stay the hell away from this, because that's what this game exists to be. And honestly, it got pretty infuriating. Because when I did manage to find a game that people were actually playing kind of like snipers should, which is get into a good position, take your shot, and then move to a new position. When I found some people who kind of knew what they were doing, well, I just died over and over and over again and couldn't spot them ever because the game doesn't really give you any feedback for when you're being shot. It's also incredibly laggy. I think it runs on peer-to-peer, which is rather infuriating. It does have a server browser, but I'm pretty sure it's just peer-to-peer, so lag is going to happen. The player base for this thing is barely existent at all. Now, I will be showing you multiplayer footage here, and you'll see a lot of it is sped up because nothing happens. And that's the thing. When you're playing the multiplayer, there's so much nothing that it's not really even worth bothering with. Yes, it's kind of cool to play around with the various sniper rifles. Yes, it's kind of cool that you can have this very tense sniper versus sniper gameplay, but it really just feels cheap more than anything else. If a person finds a good spot, they're stuck there because, well, nobody's really going to see them unless they know that spot exists to begin with, in which case they might get picked off, or if they manage to see the other person before that, they'll pick them off. The idea is that it's supposed to be kind of a cat and mouse gameplay, but it really just ends up being everybody finds a spot and just sits there, and so nothing happens, which gets pretty annoying. So the multiplayer is really not worth playing. Although it does function, I will give it that. So, Sniper Ghost Warrior 2, overall, is certainly a better game than its predecessor. But that's not saying much. The original game was friggin' terrible. It was a complete mess full of tons of bugs and glitches, horrible AI, really bad level design, just awful gameplay mechanics, etc. Ghost Warrior 2 improves upon some things and doesn't really do anything to others. For example, it feels more directed. This is both a good and a bad thing. On the one hand, they decided, hey, we're going to stick with the sniping stuff, which is what it really should have been in the first place. But we're not really going to improve anything. We're just going to kind of fix a couple of the problems that were in the original game. We're not going to go any further than that and really improve a lot of the stuff. So you do get some nice visual improvements. You do get the CryEngine 3 stuff going on. You get the slightly more in-depth sniping mechanics than in the original game. You still have the bullet cam thing. And once again, it's not anywhere near as satisfying as something like the Sniper Elite V2 or Sniper Elite 3 X-ray cams, where you're seeing bones shatter and organs burst and things like that. It's just a follow the bullet until it impacts the enemy and then they ragdoll. So, not anywhere near as satisfying. And so the gameplay ends up being just pretty mediocre in general. It's not terrible. I'll give it that. It's just not particularly good either. And it's not even really average. It's just wimpy. They could have done so much more with this thing, but they just settled for mediocrity. I give it a 2 out of 5. Thanks for watching.